Good evening, and welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. Those words always bring such a smile to my face. First, because it's so wonderful to have all of you here, and second, because I'm so proud of everything that happens here. From the robust and exciting experiential programs that we have for students when they get to become United States Senators, and we have had tens of thousands of young people come through this place. Government comes alive for them. To our public programs like Getting to the Point and Across the Aisle, where we bring together speakers and have conversations from all points of view, people with disparate ideologies, different parties, raising the issues that are most important to our country and to our communities, to the Stone Social Impact Forum. This exciting new program that we launched tonight in partnership and collaboration with our great friends and next door neighbors, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. Exciting things are happening here. And it's because of the tremendous generosity and support of Kathy and Jim Stone that we are here together for this first annual Stone Social Impact Forum to highlight a change maker who is addressing inequality and strengthening democracy. I guess you could say, Kathy and Jim, that I've just described you two. You are change makers who are addressing inequality and strengthening democracy. Passionate advocates for a more knowledgeable and inclusive society. You understand the clear connections between civic education and civic engagement. You understand how both are needed to safeguard our democracy. We are deeply grateful for your generous support for the Institute and the Library Foundation and for making this exciting evening possible. Please join me in giving them a great round of applause. Thank you. I am so looking forward to hearing our special guest, Geoffrey Canada. He has committed himself to decades of work to strengthen communities and provide equitable access to quality education. My husband was a passionate advocate for equal access to education as an essential step in what he called a march for progress. President Kennedy shared that passion. I can't think of a more fitting inaugural speaker for the Stone Impact Forum than Geoffrey Canada. Before I turn the program over to our president, Mary Grant, I hope you'll allow me, as they say in the Senate, as a matter of personal privilege, to mention just a few other special guests here. Mary will do the honors of mentioning most of the special guests here, but I want to mention just a few. Stephen Rothstein, the executive director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. He was here, he had to pop over next door, but I want to mention how proud we are to be partnering with them. Sonia Plessett, the executive director of the Stone Foundation, we are so delighted to be working with you. My fellow Kennedy Institute trustees who are here, Chancellor Catherine Newman, we are so happy that you are here from UMass Boston. Thank you so much. And the president of the Springfield Urban League, Henry Thomas. Henry, thank you so much, my fellow board member. I appreciate your being here. And I have to say how great it is to have Jenny Littlefield here. Jenny, it means so much to have you here. Her late husband, Nick Littlefield, and Jenny at his side every step of the way were so instrumental in having this place get off the ground, be open, and part of the vision to have this place be what it is. It means so much to have you here. Thank you. And one more person I need to mention, and it's my mom. And my mother, Doris Reggie, is sitting right there. And Mom, thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I am delighted to turn the program over to our fabulous leader, Dr. Mary Grant, the president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. She will set the stage for this evening's conversation with Geoffrey Canada. Thank you, Mary, for all you do.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you for all you do. We are so fortunate to have your inspirational leadership, your energy, your passion, and the shared vision with Senator Kennedy for this incredible place we have and the work that we do every day. So I want to thank Vicki for all she does here and across the communities, across the country, and the difference you make in all of our lives. So thank you so much, Vicki. Really, yeah. As Vicki mentioned, I'm Mary Grant. I'm the president of the Institute, and I'm following on a very warm welcome provided by Mrs. Kennedy. But it is a great pleasure on behalf of all of the Institute staff and the Board of Directors and the Kennedy Library Foundation to welcome all of you here this evening for the Stone Social Impact Forum. Everybody in this room, you know, there's relationships with, and I just want to, I'm always nervous when I call out a few people because I'll miss folks. So in addition to everyone that Vicki just acknowledged, board members who were here, special friends and guests, I think I see out of the corner of my eye Representative Joan Machino. Joan, thank you for being here. Representative Holmes is here with us this evening. Thank you for being here with us. Really appreciate the leadership that you provide. Representative Peisch was here a little bit earlier. So we do appreciate so much the support and the work that you do every day. Chris Gabrielli, the chair of the Board of Higher Education, is with us this evening. Chris, thank you for being with us. An old and dear friend of mine and a mentor to so many in this room, Hubie Jones, is with us this evening. I want to thank Hubie for the difference you've made in the city of Boston and in so many lives, and it's wonderful to have you and Kathy with us, Hubie. Thank you. And I am delighted that we're joined by Jessica Tang, who's president of the Boston Teachers Union. Wonderful, Jessica, to have you with us. Thank you for what you do. So this evening, and for everybody else who I may have missed or overlooked, thank you for the difference you make in the work that you do in our communities. We so value the contributions and that you're here this evening. Every day here at the Institute, we welcome visitors to step into the shoes of a United States Senator. Our programs foster a deeper understanding of how our democracy is strengthened when we all make our voices heard. Our mission is to increase the interest and the awareness in civic engagement, civic responsibilities, and civic opportunities. And the team here at the Institute, the education staff, the staff who do the programs, the staff who work with the visitors, the staff who work with students, just do a fabulous job. And I just want to thank all of them who are here this evening, who were spread around the Institute, who roll up their sleeves and give their heart and soul to invigorating our democracy and our community. So to the Kennedy Institute team, I thank you. You're all over the place, and we can't do it without you. So many thanks to my teammates here at the Institute. We work on civic engagement. We work in the space of trying to understand what opportunities will lead to a more just and equitable society and stronger communities. Our program tonight highlights how addressing inequality can both strengthen our democracy and improve the well-being of our nation. The connection is one of critical importance to Jim and Kathy Stone, and I just want to echo my Vicki with my thanks to you too. So thank you so very much for the support of this initiative and this work. It's critically important, and when you think about the things that Jim and Kathy care about, I am reminded, and it underscores a lifetime of work and difference made by our other co-founder, Senator Kennedy. He reminded us that every American should have the opportunity to receive a quality education, a job that respects dignity and protects their safety and health care, that does not condemn those whose health is impaired to a lifetime of poverty and lost opportunity. And when we do this work here every day, we are so reminded of our co-founders and the work that they do, and Senator Kennedy and the legacy that we get to do every day here. This evening, we hear from a leader who has taken bold and innovative approaches to tackling generations of poverty and inequality. As you hear how he worked to build opportunities and community resilience, we know that you will be inspired. We hope that you will be reinvigorated by hearing what is possible when regular, determined people do what it takes to have an extraordinary impact on the lives of others. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce the Stone Forum's inaugural keynote speaker, Geoffrey Canada. Geoffrey is president and founder of the Harlem Children's Zone. A nationally recognized, award-winning education reform advocate, Geoffrey has helped improve the lives of countless children, families, and communities by relentlessly tackling entrenched poverty in Harlem. Geoffrey joined the organization that would become Harlem Children's Zone in 1983. For more than 3 decades, Geoffrey led the organization, which has served tens of thousands of students and families on 97 blocks. It has done no less than help to reestablish Harlem as a home to the American dream. The Harlem Children's Zone project began as a 1-block pilot in the 1990s. From there, it steadily and systematically moved forward, block by block, challenge by challenge, initiative by initiative. He and his team did whatever it took for as long as it took to transform their community. And they're still doing it today. In 2003, the organization created a Practitioners Institute to share best practices and provide guidance for groups around the country and across the world who wanted to replicate the model. Since 2005, 477 United States organizations and 161 international delegations have participated in these programs to bring back change to their communities. And tonight, we welcome Geoffrey to share lessons learned during the organization's journey of growth and the importance of education and public service as tools to address inequity and strengthen our democracy. Following Geoffrey's remarks, we will be joined by Carrie Young, Senior Education Reporter at WBUR's Edify Desk, to continue the conversation about engaging young people and ourselves and our communities and civic lives. Carrie, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate the stories you tell about our communities and education. Thank you, Carrie. So our very special guest, Geoffrey Canada, has said, if we only prepare our children for a life of wage earning and not of serving their community, we are denying them the opportunity to experience their own greatness. It is time for our country to make public service a part of young people's lives, just as we do with their education. Children should learn history, but they should also learn how to make history. As we listen to Geoffrey tonight, consider how we can all contribute to that history. Please help me welcome Geoffrey Canada to the podium.
Wow. Well, thank you. In many ways, I have returned to the scene of the crime. It's interesting. My career did not start in Harlem. It started in Boston. And I was saying to the team here that the school I worked in it taught me a number of things, but we were working with the poorest kids we could find in Boston, and they came from the housing projects. And I knew every housing project in Boston back in the 70s. And Columbia Point, there was a housing project here, one of the most isolated places that I had seen people live. So I would come out, I had a couple of kids who were there, and then we used to go pick our kids up and make sure they came to school. So I used to come out here for them. But I have to tell you what I also learned in Boston. So this is 1975. I finished up at the ed school at Harvard, and I'm looking for a job. And these folks were running school, and they were like, oh, we want you to come in and be a teacher. And I was like, great. We'll have to do an interview. They're like, no, we don't have to do an interview. Someone offers you a job and you don't have to do an interview. You might want to think that through, right? So this was the deal. This was an alternative school, high school, for kids who had been kicked out of traditional public schools, right? They had been essentially expelled, and then they would come to this school. But the kids who were getting kicked out, so the young folks, you all wouldn't know this historically, maybe my age you would know. In 1975, Boston was right in the middle of a busing crisis. And the kids who were being bused were being attacked, and bricks were being thrown, and all of that was happening. And the shock troops, who were these kids from tough inner city kids who were Italian and Irish from East Boston and South Boston, who were throwing the rocks and acting up in school, they got kicked out. So they ended up going to the school that I was going to be the teacher, except nobody told me that's who the students were. So just imagine, these kids had literally been violently acting out to keep black people from coming into their neighborhood. And who's their teacher? And I walk, those kids take one look at me and they're like, how did we get into this situation, right? So, but this is what was fascinating to me. So I'm looking at these kids. They're all white kids. They're from East Boston, the Maverick Projects. They're from Southie Projects. And I'm like going to see where these kids live. And I didn't know white people lived in projects. See, you have to think, New York, I grew up in the inner city, all black and Latino. The projects always were black and Latino kids. I hadn't been around. And the white kids I met when I went to Bowdoin were all from prep schools. So I thought all white young people drove BMWs and, you know. So here I'm seeing these poor kids in the projects who were white. And one of the biggest revelations I had as an educator was, this didn't have anything to do with race. Those kids had the same issues of the kids I had left in the South Bronx. They were angry. They felt ostracized. They felt there was no way out for them. They were looking for someone to blame for their conditions. The one thing was, that they had taken race as sort of the filter to see everything through. So it's funny because I became their favorite teacher because I understood them. So they had this real dilemma. They were like, well, we don't like black people, but we like Jeff, right? So I don't know. I thought, well, that's a start, right? We start from where you can start. But what was so revolutionary for me to understand, for the rest of my career, whenever we talked about poor, disadvantaged kids, we talked about black and brown kids. We didn't talk about white kids. There were always more poor white kids who were struggling than black and brown kids. So half of what I thought in dealing with this issue, and why is it so hard to do education reform, is that people kept thinking we were trying to give all of this stuff to them and not to us. And I have been really upset with a bunch of folks I know in the foundation and other communities by ignoring a whole group of poor kids in this country who are white, who are also denied any ability to participate in the American dream, and we have gotten so focused on this being a minority problem that we have forgotten that this is an American problem, and we need to deal with it as an American problem, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing. So, the zone. I didn't come up with the idea of the zone right away. After working in Boston, I went back to work in New York and Harlem. But the original driving motivation that got me to be involved in education was growing up in the South Bronx during the 50s and the 60s, when that community was literally falling down. My community, about a third of the buildings were abandoned. It was open drug dealing going on. It was one of the most violent places that you could grow up. When Davis Guggenheim asked me to be in this documentary he was doing. After the documentary was finished, it didn't have a name. So about every 2 months, I'd call and say, hey, did we get a name for the documentary yet? And they had tried different names. And one day I called him. He said, oh, yeah, we've decided what we're going to call the documentary. I was like, oh, what? He said, Waiting for Superman. Now, he took that from a story, true story I told him about growing up in the South Bronx. And I was a huge comic book fan. Right? This was like a major entertainment reading comic books at that time. And when my mother told me that there was no Superman, I started to cry. And she thought I was crying because there's no Easter Bunny. Right? It's like, oh, that's so cute. I wasn't crying for that. I was crying because I knew if there were no superheroes, there was nobody who was powerful enough to save us as kids, and we weren't getting out of this place. I mean, I knew that at 8 and 9, we weren't going to make it. People say, well, Jeff, you made it, and well, I had 3 brothers. Only 2 of them made it out. Today, at 67, there's only one person that I grew up with as a friend that's still alive. This is for my generation, this is something that has haunted me. I knew those conditions were so horrible that people weren't going to make it out alive. And a lot of kids didn't make it to be past 15, 16, 17, but it didn't end there. The set of conditions continued right up until in their 40s and 50s, everybody was gone. And for me, sitting there saying, this is more than just education is not working. This is when your whole community begins to fall down around you. It makes it almost impossible for young people to get out of that. And so I tried. I tried just, doing tutoring and working and after school and all of that kind of stuff. And I just watched my kids succumb to one challenge after the other, after the other, after the other. I'd have a kid, they'd look good at 12. I'd see them at 17. They were out on a corner, not doing the right thing. And I thought, damn, I almost had them. How did I lose them? We were losing kids at every stage of their development. It's the reason we decided that we were going to do a zone. I said, if everything is falling down around a kid, why is it that we think we can do one thing to save that kid? Now, I'd love to say I have a great board. I'd love to tell you my board was all in favor of this, right? This real comprehensive lesson. Look, these are real serious businessmen, and they said, listen, Jeff, you can't do everything. Figure out the 1 or 2 things that really matter and do those things. That's what we've been trying to do to solve poverty. We've been trying to figure out how little can we do for the least amount of money to bring a permanent change to a kid's life. And I was arguing with them that was a failed strategy. And let me tell you how I finally convinced them that this idea that we had to do everything, So they were like, no, we can't afford to do everything, and you got to figure out so tell me the most important time in a kid's life, right? People say, oh, it's early childhood. I said, so early childhood, I said, so I'm talking now to my board leadership. I said, you make a lot of money. Yeah, we make good money. And there's 2 of you, and my wife has a college degree and a graduate degree. Okay, great. Y'all send your kids to the best schools. Oh, private school. Yeah, we have private schools for our kids. Oh, that's great. I said, well, when could you disappear from your kid's life? At like 2? Jeff, could never leave a 2-year-old. Your kids really need it. Okay. How about like at 7? No, because that's right when kids are learning to read. And how about like 14? 14? You can leave your kid at 14. That's when they get into, about 17. No, there's drugs and there's sex. So here it is. They worried when they left their kids for a weekend. With everything. I said, how is it you think we can work with a kid for 2 or 3 years and think their life is going to be okay when they have nothing? This doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't do it for your kid, and you've got everything. How can we do it for poor kids? So in the end, my board relented and said, not that I could do everything. They had some limits, but they said, figure out what this thing should be. So let me just say a word about a zone. When we did this work, there wasn't any science behind it. The science has become much clearer. I don't know if folks are aware of Raj Chetty's work, the economist from Harvard, but if you haven't seen his work, you should, because he actually looked at it created something, moving to opportunity. And they looked at what happens when families who are poor move to a middle class or upper middle class neighborhood. And they followed the kids' earnings, because they collected their Social Security earnings, to see whether or not that move actually allowed them to be more successful than their parents. And it turns out, and this was one of those big data things. These were millions and millions of folks they followed. It turns out, simply by moving a child to a more affluent neighborhood, it had a permanent impact on that child's earnings, with the catch, up to age 13. After that, no difference. So people heard Raj's work, and they said Raj was saying you had to move all the poor people to rich places, right? Which is totally unrealistic. That's not what he was saying. He was saying if we don't figure out how to fix the challenges in communities so they become healthy places for young people, we are preventing young people at scale from doing it. There'll always be a couple of kids who will do well, but we're preventing them from, at scale, from being able to do well. So what did we do? We decided we had to rebuild that community. That meant fixing it up, cleaning it up, organizing we started with 1 block, and we went to 2 blocks, we went to 4 blocks, with a simple message: we want you to join us in rebuilding Harlem. Second thing, we created a Cradle to Career pipeline for our kids. And we start with parents at birth, and something we call baby college, and we stay with those same kids until they graduate from college. Now, this is our 3rd class we've had of kids who started with us literally as infants, who've gone off to college. It's amazing. They all see me, they say, Mr. Canada. They say, Mr. Canada, I started at baby college. Don't you remember me? And I say, sure, I remember you. I mean, I don't know who that child is. It was like 15 years ago. I barely remember people I met yesterday. This idea of supporting kids throughout their entire development is something that I think is just a standard piece of practice that makes sense, and yet we don't do it. The evidence is clear. Everybody know about toxic stress and ACEs. If you haven't heard about those adverse childhood experiences, another thing you need to know about. They have permanent impact on young people when they're growing up in conditions, right, that flood their system with adrenaline, right? That whole chemical reaction when you're 4 and 5 and 6, it has a permanent impact on you when kids are growing up in toxic conditions. So this idea of how do we make sure kids grow up in communities that they feel supportive and loved versus communities that feel dangerous and scary for them, to me is absolutely critical. Scale. Kids do what their friends do. So if you're working with 2 kids and you're getting them to do the right thing, but I see some people smiling over there, but everybody else is doing the wrong thing, right? It's very hard for kids to do something that's right because you're the exception and not the rule. And here's a clear example. When we started with this idea that we were sending kids to college, first I had like 15 kids in college. I remember somebody came in and they were like, what's your deal? I said, we sending kids to college. I have a board. I put everything on my board because I believe in transparency. They looked on the board with 15 kids. They said, Jeff, that is not impressive. I said, but we're going to send more kids every year. Today we have 950 kids on that board, right? But wait. But you know what happens in a community when there are only 10 or 12 kids in college? And you ask somebody who lives in Harlem, do you know anybody who goes to college? And they say, well, I think there's this girl who lives on 117th Street. Say, well, could you go to college? No, because you have to be a genius. No one from Harlem goes to college. You know what happens when you have 950 kids in college? You ask somebody to go to college, they're like, if he's in college, I know I could go to college, right? I mean, but I'm being serious, right? It just normalizes a set of expectations. So all of that stuff that we want kids to do, how come I have to learn algebra? Because you're going to college. That's why. You needed to get in college. If you're not going to college, I don't know why you have to learn it. I don't know why you should pay attention to, some of these courses if you're not going to college. But when a kid knows they're going to college, it makes them feel like, okay, I understand why you're requiring me to do this. Most of what we've tried to do is normalize a set of behaviors that prepare kids to be successful. And this college issue, to me, is absolutely critical because, and I got in a little trouble about this issue. All of my kids are expected to go to college, every single kid. We have 13,000 kids, and I want all 13,000 to go to college, and that's, to me, sort of the minimum expectation. And people have said to me, Jeff, what about, vocational education is great. They say, what about uniform services? Great. You're going to join the military, the police, the fire. All that's great. Just not for my kids. My kids are going to college. All of them. And that's the expectation. So if you come to my school, we have the kids all line up in the hallways and they say their creed. So I had my youngest kid with me, and the kids are all lined up in the hallway, starting in kindergarten, and part of the creed, the end of their creed goes, we will go to college, we will succeed, this is my promise, this is my creed. So you got hundreds of kids in the hallway, they're all lined up there saying that, and my young son looks at me and he says, oh God, Dad, you're brainwashing these kids. I said, that's right, that's what we're doing. So when we just had our graduation, we sent that whole class off to college. Guess what they did to start their graduation? They said their creed. They had been saying it since they were 4 and 5 years old, that this is the expectation. And here's the problem when you change that expectation, because people have been kind of a little unsure about that. When you change that expectation, you give adults, teachers and principals an off-ramp. You give them a way of saying, so if I said 90% of our kids have to go to college, I'd have a whole bunch of my staff saying, oh, thank God, because I didn't know what we were going to do with Kareem over there, right? He's driving us nuts. Every kid goes to college, no off-ramp. Now, all my kids don't end up going, but they all get in. They all end up going. Some kids say, I don't want to go, but you're getting in. The fact that you don't want to go is going to be your choice, that you decide after you've gotten in college, I don't want to go. It's not going to be because you think I couldn't get in college or I'm not college material. That's not what we're going to let our kids think. So that just becomes part of their development. Now, part of the challenge is that we believe in providing a comprehensive set of supports. So, great arts, great sports. We make sure our kids do service, that they feel like they are rebuilding their community. And I worry when I find systems say they can't afford sports and arts and all of that kind of stuff. I bet 10 or 15, it's true. I bet 10 or 15% of my kids who graduate and go on to school did it because they want to play basketball. That's what they want. I wish they wanted something more. That's what they want. You know what? If that's what you want, and if you get that minimum, you have to have a 75 to stay on that team. If that'll get you through until you realize you're not getting drafted because you can't even make Division I, and then you go to Plan B, I'm good with that. Nothing wrong with that. I just don't want them dropping out, right? I don't want them giving up. I want them to stay, and we'll use whatever tool we have to keep them engaged. If it's chess, if it's dance, if it's basketball, whatever it is, keep those kids engaged. And one day, guess what? They're heading off to school. They were like, well, I didn't really want to go to college, but I had nothing else to do. Now, 15 years ago, that would be, I think I'm going to hang on the corner and see if I can hustle and make me some money, because I don't know what else to do. Now, this is, yeah, I go to college, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go there and figure it out. And my theory is, great. There's nothing better for 18-year-olds who don't know what to do than to be on a college campus driving some dean crazy, right? Because I know what they're going to do if they hang on the streets of Harlem. I know the mistakes kids make at 18 because kids are kids. But if you're on the streets of Harlem, those mistakes can destroy your life. If you're on that college campus, you're probably going to have to go into the dean. Maybe you're going to get sent home for a week or two and have to go through a whole thing, right? But you're not going to destroy you. So here's one of the challenges that I think we have to deal with. For some reason, even till this day, we have this belief that to be a teacher, to be an educator, you don't need to be the best and the brightest. We don't pay people like they're professionals. We don't treat people like they're professionals. And yet we expect them to do this really, really tough job. And to me, that's just ridiculous. This is the toughest job. Teaching, now I taught for a living. It's one of the toughest jobs you can do. A lot of my CEO friends, they always say, you know, Jeff, he could have been a CEO at a Fortune 500 company. And I said to myself, yeah, but you sure couldn't have been a teacher. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that. All right. I want to just say, I know I'm running out of time here, so I want to say one last thing for people in this work. We can't give up on kids. The other great thing about being in a place for 35 years, I've seen kids that I knew, because I'm smart and I had a great education, I knew that kid wasn't going to make it. I say, yeah, well, we tried. And guess what? 4 years later, I see this young person walking down the street, got his little tie. I said, what's going on? You know I was messing up, Mr. Canada, but I remember what you told me, and I straightened my thing out, and I went to that junior college, and now and I'm sitting there saying to myself, oh, I'm glad I didn't tell nobody that kid wasn't going to make it, right? Here's the truth. You can't give up. People change. Things happen. I see folks want to just throw these kids out, expel them, get rid of them. That's so unfair. So many of our kids that everybody gave up on, we've seen become successful. So I'd like to close my talks with poems that I write And this one poem, I think, is fitting because we have conditions in our schools. I am just so upset that people go into schools to kill children. And we're growing up, my generation grew up hiding from a nuclear bomb. They used to make you hide underneath the desk. Now, some of y'all are old as I am, so y'all know. Can I just tell you, I never got that whole hide underneath the desk. I was like, don't radiation go through stuff? Are they just trying to make us feel better underneath this desk? What's that about? But that was some foreign thing. That wasn't somebody that you saw in the lunchroom or some neighbor who was down the block coming in to destroy you. And I'm telling you, the trauma our young people are going through, just to go to school and have to practice this. Everybody has to practice these and sort of intruder alert things is just making being a kid only in this country is this happening. That we're traumatizing our children, all of them. They're being traumatized because we've allowed this country to become so violent that we are letting kids be murdered on a regular basis. So those of us who know better, we've got to take a stand. So let me close with take a stand. Maybe before we didn't know that Corey is afraid to go to school, the store, to roller skate. He cries a lot for a boy of 8. But now we know each day it's true that other girls and boys cry too. They cry for us to lend a hand. Time for us to take a stand. And little Maria's window screens keeps out flies and other things. But she knows to duck her head when she prays each night for bed. Because in the window come some things that shatter little children's dreams. For some, the hourglass is out of sand. Time for us to take a stand. And Charlie's deepest secret wishes is someone to smother him with kisses and squeeze and hug him tight, so tight, while he pretends to put up a fight. Or at least someone to be at home who misses him. He's so alone. Who allowed this child-forsaken land? Look in the mirror. Take a stand. And on the Sabbath, when we pray to our God, we often say, "Oh Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, I come to better understand how to learn to love and give and lead the life you taught to live. In faith, we must join hand in hand. Suffer the children, take a stand." And tonight, some child will go to bed, no food, no place to lay their head. No hand to hold, no lap to sit, to give slobbery kisses from slobbery lips. So you and I, we must succeed in this crusade, this holy deed, to say to the children of this land, have hope. We're here. We take a stand. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight for this conversation with Geoffrey Canada. Jeff, thank you so much for taking this opportunity to talk with me a little bit more about your keynote remarks, but also the decades that you've spent working in education. And so I think I want to take this opportunity to I want to start by talking about scalability of the Harlem Children's Zone. I think a lot of educators and policymakers in the audience tonight are probably wondering, how can I close that achievement gap for the students that are in my city or in my block? How can I also ensure that they all at least have the chance to get into college? So what advice would you give to them?
So the first advice I would give to folk is that mostly we spend our time thinking about poor children within certain constraints. And they're usually financial. Usually say, this is what we can do. We'd love to do this, but this is really all we can do. I'm like, those constraints are phony. I know that's a tough word, but let me tell you what I mean. People have beaten up on me about the cost per child to do our work. Okay, how much does it cost you? It costs us about $3,000. I usually say $5,000 because I like that higher number, a little sticker shock. And here's why: because the average cost to incarcerate someone in this country is $30,000. In New York State, it's $60,000. Now, let me tell you what it costs in New York City. You incarcerate someone at Rikers Island, it's $147,000 a year. We have scaled up all of that, and no one blinks an eye. No one said, no, I'm not going to send you to jail. We can't afford that anymore. We're going to just like stop, and it's all good. So that's why I say it's phony. We've allowed folks to convince us that we won't spend $3,000 to save a child, but let that kid turn 17 and we're prepared to spend any amount of money, and you get zero for those investments when that kid goes to jail. You get nothing. Let somebody in here collect $60,000 and produce no outcome and see what happens. You will be out of business overnight. But we allow that to happen here. So here's my message. We've got to figure out what it really takes to get this work done. And then we're going to have to fight like hell to make sure that government, philanthropy, businesses are prepared to underwrite the cost of this so that we can scale this work across the country.
I wanted to follow up, too, with to hear a little bit more about what you've heard from the students. I know you spoke a couple of times about running into people who said, I started with you when I was 8 years old, and they're adults now. So what have you heard from them about the experiences in the Harlem Children's Zone that really stuck with them and helped them through?
Well, you know, we're like a family. Our young people, I think, sort of take us for granted, right? Because they've grown up literally with the Harlem Children's Zone around them, and it's not till they go away that they realize, oh, this is not the way everybody else lives. This is not how everybody else is school, because we have these great grade A schools. We built them brand new. My theory is always there's nothing too good for my kids, right? And I want them to grow up feeling like they were in a really good place. So it's a little shocking for them when they go out there and find out no one really cares about us like that, the way you guys do. And I think that is probably the biggest shock they have. But the key for me is when we started this work, people defined success by leaving Harlem, right? You could get out. You could get out. The only people stayed in Harlem, people couldn't get out. We wanted Harlem to be a place where our kids defined success by wanting to live there. And the best thing is they all want to come back. They want to come back to Harlem. Now, there's a downside to that. Harlem has become so expensive. It doesn't look anything like it used to, that it's really unaffordable. All right, it's become so gentrified. It's really unaffordable for kids right now. And that is a real downside. But I hate to tell folk this, but nowadays kids end up staying with their parents after they graduate school, sometimes till they're 30. And I just didn't want to tell some of you young folks that. But so we still have them coming into Harlem. But the one thing that I wish I would have done 20, 25 years ago, when no one wanted the housing in Harlem and they were literally giving it away, I wish I would have gotten some of that housing and created starter housing for my kids so they would come in, have studio apartments, and get that first job and then be able to move up and keep going.
And on that note, I want you to think back to a time maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, when this was still very much just an experiment. You were trying some things out and seeing if they would work. Was there ever a time, or can you think back to a time that you remember a child or a class that you thought, this is why we're doing this, and this is working?
Well, I'll tell you, we had this really interesting experience. There was a young man who was in the gang, out the gang. They had caught the kid. They had cut him up. We were trying, his mama kicked him out the house. This was one kid that we thought might not actually survive. And when he was homeless and being reckless, we didn't know what else to do with him. And so we had this great idea that we were going to send him to one of those camps where they take wayward kids in like Arizona, right in the middle of nowhere. So, you know, you get those tough kids. So we sent him there. He lasted 3 days. They sent him back. They were like, no, he's not staying here. Well, that kid, I thought we were going to lose. And if you looked at our data, he would not be a success on our data. But 6 months ago, at a knock on my door, I look out, there he is. He said, I'm going into my second year college, and I just want you to know I'm not involved in that stuff anymore. And that just struck me in a way, because I look, we got him through high school, but I was like, that's probably all that's going to happen. It struck me in a way that the promise of this work is that it may take some people 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years, but if you lay that foundation, those folks are going to come back to that set of values that you instilled in them, and they're going to use that to get to the next level, which is what happened with this young person.
It's great to hear. So the theme of this series of talks is social impact. And so I want to talk, as we sit here in a replica of the United States Senate, what role do you think that access to a quality education plays in having a healthy democracy and even encouraging future social change, or even just encouraging civic engagement among young people?
But it's interesting, because if you look at the major changes that have happened in this country, young people, and typically college age and college young people, have been in the forefront, right? They were and I'm dating myself, they were in the forefront of fighting to end the war in Vietnam. They were in the forefront of really trying to work for women's rights and gay rights, and again, you saw all of this activism happening on the college campus. When you look at Black Lives Matter, right? A bunch of young folks got together and decided, when you look at what happened with the Parkland kids, right? They took that tragedy and they decided, we're going to stand up, and they got a lot of attention. I think that the fact that if you allow democracy to sort of grow without giving young people a real education, then you set it up to be taken over by some authoritarian person who feeds you with stuff that you're not able to think your way around or through. And we've seen that happen in other countries, where folks literally could not figure out what was true and was not true. I think those of us who believe, and I believe in a liberal arts education. I know people think it's all about math and science and other stuff, but I think kids need a well-rounded education so that they can really understand things and figure things out for themselves.
What advice would you give to people? I guess I want to jump off of something I read about the development of the Harlem Children's Zone, and when you started with them, that there was this goal of turning things around for the schools and for the kids in Harlem. And so for someone who has this big goal like that, how do you even start? What advice would you give to someone like that?
Well, the biggest mistake people have made trying to replicate our work is they want to do scale right off the bat. And they forget we started with literally one block. And we said, if we can't fix this one block, we're not going to be able to fix 20, right? So we got better each year at fixing blocks and getting folks to be engaged. For me, the key to this work is building a team. I couldn't have done this by myself. There's no way you can do this stuff by yourself. You need a really serious team. And you need a team that's all in, that's totally committed, but prepared to face failure. One of the things that happened, we got better because we kept failing, and we didn't hide from the failure. We looked at the failure, we tried to figure out, because we believed we were good enough to fix the failure, but we had to face it. But it's no fun facing failure, right? It's just not. This idea of continuous improvement, of looking at the data, of figuring out how you can make it better, to me, is absolutely critical. So I would say start small, perfect it, and then scale it. The problem with scaling is often around talent, right? It's easy to do something small because you can find a small number of committed people to do almost anything. Once you start the scale thing, you're really running a different kind of business, right? Then you have to worry about paying people adequately so that you can be competitive with other folks who are looking for talent out there in the world. So that part, I think, comes as you grow. And I would just warn folks, the folks who start these enterprises are often not the ones who should run them, right? There's a difference in a startup and a full-fledged, I love this work because I'm really, really good with kids. I mean, you just have to take my word for it. I really am. I excel at that. It was always what I was good at. I spend no time with kids, right? I am spending all my time with adults. And look, I like you all, but given my druthers, I'd be with the kids. If you're not prepared to do what's necessary for the business, right, that business is not going to be successful. So at some point, early on when we started the zone, I realized my whole work with young people directly, and it was over, right? I was going to be managing a bunch of adults, and raising a bunch of money. That's how I was going to spend my time. That's not what I went to school to do. That's not why I went to school. So this idea of making sure that you're prepared as the organization grows and develops to bring in the kind of talent and to make sure your skill set matches that talent is part of the challenge. And often, people stay when they shouldn't. You often see people who start organizations and it's great, but as that organization gets more mature, they don't have the set of skills to keep that organization moving forward, but they're holding on and they won't let go. And it actually ends up hurting their organization in the long haul.
I want to follow up a little bit, too, on something you said in that last answer of learning from your failures in this process. Is there one that really sticks with you that you guys learn the most from?
Yeah. Well, look, there are a number of them that worked, that we failed at, but I'll tell you probably one of the biggest. I believe that this whole issue is around getting people jobs so that they can make or earn a living, support their families. So we started an employment center. And we renovated. It was beautiful. We had a great curriculum, and there was only one problem. Young people didn't want to do it. So it was all of these older folk who were there, a lot of women wanting second careers and coming back and getting training. But when the young people came, they came to us because either their girlfriend or their mother said, if you don't have a job by next week, right, you're out of here. So they came to us for a job, but we had a 6-month training program. They were like, I can't spend 6 months. I need a job right now. There was such a mismatch. But here we had built this beautiful organization. We had a place, and we were sitting there hanging on to this thing, even though it was not fulfilling the mission that we had created. So finally, we had to say no. We had to close it, and we had to say, it was a great idea, seemed to make sense, but in the end, it wasn't delivering for the folks we wanted. It was delivering for a different group of folks, but that wasn't our target audience. So that was one of our classic failures, that we ended up going more towards youth direct employment instead of this long training thing for young adults.
Well, I think now it's time for the question and answer session from the audience. And so I'd love to hear what follow-up questions audience members may have from that, especially that great advice there. Anyone? I see. Do you see? Oh, yes, down here.
Great. So she was curious about funding and asked how I fund something so large. Here's a word about fundraising and development. It is a science. And if you don't know the science, I used to think it was how well you could write. right? And I used to write these grants and they wouldn't get funded. And I'd just say, wow, I thought I wrote really well. That is not it. There's a whole nother science to this. And I tell folks, everybody can't do development because development is like, you know, you all would think less of me if you saw me raising money, right? I'm just being honest because, you know, to raise the money, you have to kiss the ring and all the other body parts that might need to be kissed. It is what it is. But I'm being serious. This idea, we raise year in and year out about $35–40 million every year we have to raise, right? It's just every year we're out there, we're doing that. And it has taught me that a really, really good development person is rare. It is rare. You have a lot of development people, but they really can't raise real money. And when you find, they're usually, the really good ones are usually at the big institutions, right? The art museums, the colleges, universities, they get them and they pay them. And often if you're running a not-for-profit, you can't afford them, right? And so you end up with someone doing development who really can't take you to that next level. And so what I would say to folk who are really interested in it, you may not be able to afford one of those folks, but go actually find one and spend some time, even if you have to do it for free, learning the art of development. It is a real art, and it involves research. And I was telling folks, before I meet with somebody, I know everything about them. I know if they're a Republican or a Democrat, right? I know if they like kids or they like dogs. It doesn't matter, right? I'm going to figure out some way that we're going to connect. So that's going to help that conversation. And if you don't have a team that can do that for you, you're really at a real disadvantage. So the other thing I'll just say about development is you've got to have results. People care about the results. Do not go out and try to raise the money until you've got some results that you can lead with the results moving forward. But that's not going to, believe me, results by themselves will not raise money. That is not going to be the case. You need results and the skills it takes to raise money.
I see a question up here in the gallery on the top floor.
Ooh, you are.
I'm curious more about how you got the community engaged and how you really built that morale for the community to buy into that idea, because I think for me that feels like the hardest part.
Yeah.
Is really getting everyone on board. So I'm curious to hear more what you all did.
Oh, that's great. So there were a couple of pieces to this community thing. The first was a very simple message to folk that we thought we could rebuild Harlem. Did they want to join us? And we literally knocked on every single door on every single block with that message, and this is what we heard. Yes. And then we said, will you join us? No. Right? So everybody said, yes, we think it's a great idea, but only 10% of the folks would come and work for us. Now, so that's A. Here's the B part of that. In communities like Harlem, I don't know which one community you're representing, but communities like Harlem, there are gatekeepers who stop things from happening in those communities because you have to go through them, right? And they are often part of the problem and not part of the solution. So let me tell you how we got around that. We knocked on all the doors and we set up a priority. What's the number one priority this block needs? There's an abandoned lot over there. It's filled with rats. I said, great. This weekend, we're going to clean up the lot, and the folks who come to do that, we're then going to invite to the next meeting. So only the people who came out, put on their gloves, helped us, and then they came to the next meeting. Not the leaders, not the block president that never did anything, just the people who did the work. So guess what happened when those people who thought they were leaders tried to stop us? The folks who did the work were like, no, you wasn't down here. No, Jeff was right there, we're doing the work, so don't come in here with that stuff. And it stopped, this became about the work. The next piece was people romanticize about community. Oh, the community knows the answers. No, they don't. Why would they know? Who the heck knows how to do this stuff? What they know is they know the local wisdom of their neighborhood. So we would say, let's all get trained together. We would take our community residents and find the best housing organization in the country. It was in Chicago. We'd all go to Chicago to see what they were doing in Chicago. Then they would come back and we'd say, well, what do you think we should do with that knowledge in Harlem? And they could say, well, then this won't work in Harlem because of this, but this will work. So we made sure that we all were on the same learning curve and that we all were learning the best practice in each one of these areas. And then the final piece of this was we took our folks away on retreat. We had to get our community residents away so they could really spend the time thinking and working on this stuff. And we were very transparent. We put up on the board, this is what we're going to accomplish this year. And every year when we would come back, we'd say, did we accomplish these things? How did this? And after a while, that trust began to grow. People realized this wasn't about profiling. It wasn't about, you know, us coming in as carpetbaggers, getting a bunch of jobs and not doing anything. We were really about the work. But that happened over time. That wasn't, I would love to tell you, oh yeah, we convinced everybody in a year or two. It did not. It took us some years to get that done.
Taking a look around. Okay, we have another question up here.
Thank you for coming. My name is Sharon Hinton. I'm a college faculty professor and also founder of Black Teachers Matter. So I have two questions. One, can you talk about the importance of having teachers of color in the majority population of students of color? And the other one, I believe in college, but college is ridiculously expensive and it's burdening our students with costs that they can't get rid of, and they're laden with this ridiculous tens of thousands of dollars, and they don't necessarily have a job that can pay that, and they can't get rid of this burden from college education.
Yep. So two questions. One, it's interesting, when you come to the Harlem Children's Zone, you notice two things. You notice we have lots of people of color, but we have lots of men working also. We have a lot of Black and Latino men working with us, and that's intentional. Here is somewhat of a dilemma when you come from really communities that haven't had great education. When we started in Harlem, we were looking for talent, but we couldn't find the talent because these were serious jobs we had, but folks didn't have a serious education in Harlem for the last 30 years. So we were trying to figure out, how do we build the talent? So this is what we did. We sent our talented folks back to school. And what happened was they went, first they got their undergraduate degree, then they got their graduate degree. So right now, if you look at how our organization is run, about a third of the people who run our organizations grew up in Harlem and were part of our program. And through this college education, they went and developed a set of skills that they could really deliver for us. So this was a twofer. But I want to say, at the beginning, that talent was not in Harlem. We couldn't find it. We had to build it. But we thought, what better community building exercise could there be than that? Finding talent, encouraging that talent to get a set of credentials that would allow them not just to work for us, but to work anywhere, and to make that sort of as a signal to everybody in the community that that's what we wanted to do. Now, on the college debt thing, I will tell you that the college costs have become so outrageous, right, that the schools that even were considered bargains are no longer bargains for kids right now. And that's a problem. And I think this is on the agenda of a lot of the folks who are running for president right now. Hopefully someone's going to do something about this. I can only tell you what I tell my students. We try and get our kids scholarships, and we raise a lot of scholarship money for kids. It's, to me, this is a value judgment. I'd rather have my kids with that college debt and a degree than with no debt and no degree. Now, where it really backfires if they get debt and no degree. Now you've actually made their life worse and not better, which is why we're spending more and more of our time trying to make sure our kids get through college and actually end up with the degree. But we have to do something about the cost of college. Right now, it's a dividing line that is separating I think, a number of kids from reaching their full potential simply because they don't want to go to college. I'll tell you the other thing that existed today that did. When I went to college, we had to borrow money, but it was no big deal. But this is why it was no big deal. Back in 1970, they didn't let poor people have credit. The only credit you get is like the local neighborhood store, right? You get a loaf of bread, a container of milk. You couldn't get no credit cards. Nowadays, our kids are growing up where their parents are in serious debt and they can't get out of it. So this kid is thinking, now you want me to get in debt too? I'm looking what it's doing to my house. My whole house, everybody's drowning with debt. Now you expect me to go out and go to college and get debt? So this has now changed. So a lot of my kids are debt averse. They're just like, no, I don't want to. And we say, no, there's bad debt and there's good debt. They don't want to hear that. They're just like, we know what happens when you can't afford to pay those bills at the end of the month, and we don't see how this thing is going to help us. I think this is another area where we're going to have to get some change in this country so college becomes more affordable for students. Yep.
I see another question on this side of the gallery.
I just wanted to ask you, how do you compete with a school-to-prison pipeline that's paying kids $50, $60 a week to transport and sell drugs?
Yeah.
How do you compete financially with that and keep their attention?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Rather than being distracted, getting a good education?
It's a great question. We have a very simple, straightforward answer. Our kids all, once they turn 14, they all can get part-time jobs. And the jobs, they're the editors of the newspaper, they're producing play. And this is what we wondered. How much money does a kid have to make to avoid getting caught up in the drug game? And people say it's hundreds of dollars. No, it's not hundreds of dollars. No, it's not. Our kids are getting about $50 every 2 weeks. And what do you need? You need enough so you can get a haircut. You need enough so, you want to go to the movies, you can go to the movies. Enough if you save up a few weeks, you can get some sneakers. I'll tell you how I know this is cultural, right? That in a place where kids have thought the only way you are going to make any money is to go hustle. They know the risk of hustling. They know people get arrested, people get killed, but if you have no money, what are you going to do? So I got, in one of our programs, somebody was really angry about the program, and they called me and they said, Jeff, guess what? Those kids have jobs. They've all learned how to beat the system, and they're lying on their timesheets. And they said that was such outrage, and I thought, now that's good. Now they're doing white collar crime, right? That's all right. That's all right. I'll take that, right? That's better than them standing on those corners, right? So, but I'm not kidding about this. I think in poor communities, kids need to be able to earn enough, what I call survival money, right? Just enough so they can make a rational, and you know what? They make a rational choice. They know the downside. I do not have kids going, up until a year ago, I could say we had 0 of our kids in jail. 0, none. Now we have 1, right? Give young people a way, because there's 2 things going. Number 1 is a future, because they know they're going to college. And number 2 is they're able to make enough pocket money, right, to get them from September to June when they can get their summer jobs and get that. But we got a bunch of kids, thousands of kids, so it's not an insignificant amount of money when you're paying kids sort of these stipends, but it's well worth it. And I don't know how to do it without it, right? Without these kids making some amount of money, I don't know how you're going to stop them from drifting into, right, this issue of, boy, I really need to get $25, and someone says, do that thing for me.
Did you actually engage business leaders to try to recruit some of those students?
To actually recruit some of those students to work? And no, but for this reason, why we haven't. We do, when our kids go to college, we do recruit business leaders to employ our kids in internships and other things with the expectation that they're going to find out these are really bright and talented kids, right? And they're going to do well. But we're the biggest youth employer in Harlem, but I also fire more kids in Harlem than anybody else, right? Because when kids don't do right, they have to know there's a consequence. But I want them to learn that while they're young, right? And they can come back and say, okay, Mr. Canada, I won't do that. I know I got to show up on time. I can't wear my pants sagging down. I know the deal now. I've, cleaned my act up. We want that to happen when they're with us. When we send them out there, we want them to be polished young men and women that people say, yeah, I'd hire a kid like that, and you got another kid to send me? So that's why we don't send them out early to go to those other kinds of sites.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. I know there's a question just below you, sir. Yes, that.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. Amy O'Leary from Strategies for Children in Boston, and you talked about early childhood, and when you started, we didn't have the evidence that we have now. What is it going to take for us to change our priorities and invest more earlier to get the bigger outcome later? We know we're not acting on it.
Yeah, here's another case where the science on this is really clear, right? We've got science that's not driving policy. I think this is going to be another one of these movements, and it's one of the reasons that we're trying to advocate for these really comprehensive. Cradle to career, for me, does not mean pre-K to career, right? To me, it means cradle. The science on this stuff is really clear what happens to those young brains when kids are 6 months, 1 year. And if you're in communities where people don't know how to stimulate those brains appropriately, that's going to put that kid at a disadvantage. So the question is, what is it going to take? It's going to take us not giving up and folks not feeling like, you hear things today and people think it's outlandish. Like, where would you ever get the money to pay for that? Mayor de Blasio in New York decided after everybody else said it couldn't be done and he was going to do universal pre-K. He just decided it. Okay, I'm going to do universal pre-K. And he did it. We have universal pre-K in New York. But the point is, everybody else said they couldn't do it. Everybody else had excuses why they couldn't do it, and he just did it. And if you think New York City's no poorer, there's no one missing anything in New York City because we decided to do universal pre-K for all the kids. This is part of the challenge. In the Bronx, we used to call it the old okey doke, right? It's like if you're playing basketball, you only had one move, right? A head fake. And people kept going for it. You'd be like, don't go for the okey doke, it's the same move. We go for the okey doke, we can't afford it. Right? That's what people, we can't afford that. It's simply not true. You will see that this is a matter of public will, and are we prepared to fight for stuff? And if you're prepared to fight for stuff, you'll be surprised. The one thing, if this time in our national politics, if there's one thing it's taught us is, there are a lot of politicians who will do anything to stay in office, even sell out their own country just to stay in office. So this idea that could you get them to do the right thing? Yeah, if you put enough pressure on them, you could get them to do the right thing, but we have to be organized to be able to get that done.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We have to wrap up today, though. I could sit here for hours and interview you, and I know our audience has a lot of questions too. But I wanted to wrap this up by asking you if you had any final remarks for us.
Yeah, first of all, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm thrilled that I'm the inaugural speaker. I just want to say to people that I've met a lot of folk who feel like they've been beaten down, right? That we've tried so hard, we just haven't gotten to where we want to get. Seems like things are going backwards and not going forwards. And I just want to remind folk, in one of the darkest periods of my young or old history here, in the 60s, anyone who went through the 60s when President Kennedy was killed, when Bobby Kennedy was killed, when Dr. King was killed, when Malcolm X was killed, when you had riots throughout the whole country on the summer times, we not only got the civil rights movement during that time, we got the women's rights movement, we got the gay rights movement. In the midst of when everything seemed to be hopeless, Americans stood up and they began to fight and they changed this country for the better. And I don't want anyone thinking because we happen to be in a rough patch right now, that this is signaling the end of anything. This is signaling the beginning of the next great movements for equity in this country.
Thank you. Dr. Grant?
What an incredibly and powerful, hopeful note to wrap up such an inspiring evening and conversation. Carrie, thank you. Jim and Kathy, thank you. Vicki, thank you. To all of you who came out tonight, to all of you who work in the education space, whether you're teachers or counselors or nonprofit leaders or former school superintendents, I thank you for the work that you're doing every day. And Geoffrey, thank you for reminding us that when we work together, we can make our best difference, that it's a long game, that we have to let history be our guide. We've got to bring people together. And I don't know about you, but I was so struck because you were talking about my kids, our kids, my kids, our kids. And at one point you mentioned your 6-year-old son being in the mix. And I realized this is a leader who sees all of the kids as our kids, whether they're your own or the kid next door or the kid around the block. And that's what we all have to do, see them as our children, our future, and together we can make these things happen. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your creed to succeed, and thank you for reminding us to take a stand. Thank you all for coming.